Yes, I can. Thank you, Ratan. So if we look at the ITC hotel system, of course, we own most of the hotels or all the hotels, and hence it was a broad decision taken by the company to retain every employee, and of course that was the approach which makes sense. Having said that, on the other hand, in Fortune Hotels, all our hotels are managed, and as articulated by the earlier speakers as well, we do have the challenge of cash flows across every single hotel, given that most hotels are operational with very less revenue coming in or pretty much on suspended operations, and hence has been a challenge in managing that. We continue having discussions with our partners, the owners, in looking at how that can be managed. Of course, most owners have different approaches to the same challenge. Some look at it in a bit of a long-term issue. Some of it, of course, are guided and bound by short-term capital and cash challenges, and hence there are some decisions which are harsher in that sense. We've had a call this morning as well with one of our colleague hotel owners, and trying to understand how we can support them through this process. More importantly, making sure, exactly as Mr. Bakaya mentioned, how do we try and at least, even if we have to go with salary cuts in those hotels, how do we support retaining as many jobs as we can do in the short term? Of course, as we get into long term, there is going to be a lot of conversation around how will hotels get more efficient, variable costs versus fixed costs. Clearly, all this is happening because specifically, if I look at our market in India and having worked in a few other markets, I think the biggest challenge we all face is that salaries are pretty much fixed costs and they don't vary as much as we see in some of the developed markets in the way salary costs can be varied. So hence, when there is a pressure situation like what we are faced today, of course, we've not faced something as bad in at least the last few decades I've been in the industry. So we are bound or pushed to make cuts in the biggest cost area, which is people. And I think eventually we will all go into that stage where we will be looking at reviewing our cost structures purely from a people perspective, looking at how we can drive in efficiencies. So that will be the long-term effect of what we are going through today. Exactly like you mentioned, let's first understand the premise of why this will happen, or would it happen. In my mind, I think the basic fundamental issue which we are all going to be faced with is fear and unpredictability. So there is a lot of fear that we don't know what this disease is bringing in. This pandemic is going out of control. And hence, of course, added on to the unpredictability factor of we don't know when the vaccine is going to come out, how long is it going to be, etc., is going to create some challenges. I think it's a bigger problem than just for hoteliers. I think it's a civic problem, because it's not only for hotels. Exactly like you mentioned, it could be in apartments. I have seen on various social media groups how people are reacting to something as simple as a neighbor being infected or being tested positive. I mean, it's almost like some people are reacting as it's untouchability. So I guess we will have to go through that up and down as a society, including us as hoteliers. Of course, we are a lot more into the people element, and hence I think we will probably get hit faster. Yes, you mentioned that point on would it be an impact on the brand? In the short term, there will be certain people who will try to take advantage of it, but I think all level-headed brands, all level-headed people will stay away from it, because nobody is immune to this. That's the reality. It can happen to any hotel. It can happen to any brand. Nobody can guarantee 100% safety. So I guess, given that we are exactly as mentioned a couple of times before, we are fairly level-headed, we are fairly resilient and mature as an industry. I think we will be able to deal with it. Yes, there will be those odd cases hearing of how the competitor goes out to town and says there were 2 cases in that hotel. But like I said, as more and more cases get reported, people are going to get used to it. Yes, the bigger pressure on us is how do we make sure that we continue this day in, day out of coaching our employees, coaching our colleagues to make sure that they are following all the hygiene practices, and also continuing the messaging to our guests, because I think that's critical. Of course, guests are going to see it from the time they step off from their homes and get onto a car, assuming they have got into one of those branded car companies, or at the airport, and then eventually walking into the hotel. So I guess, yes, we will probably go through this up and down over the next few weeks as we open, but eventually things will settle on. We'll all get used to it. We will all focus on what's more important, which is making sure we are following all hygiene and sanitation processes in the hotels, taking care of our colleagues and taking care of our guests. Absolutely. And I think we first need to understand why is this happening. So if I look at some of the other countries, and especially in the region around us, Singapore has a government agency driven program called SG Clean, which is
Correct.
a very simple checklist which hotels, not only hotels, hotels, shopping malls, they've got different criteria for different establishments. So they've started something like that. Malaysia has started something which is, of course, not done by the government, but the Malaysian Association of Hotels, which is a clean and safe campaign and a certification with it. So they are going in for a centralized nationwide program. In our case, probably the gap which is being created by that not happening is giving an opportunity to some of the other players in the market. And clearly, as Mr. Bakaya mentioned, if it is somebody who is already engaged in the market in a different form, say online travel, then there is a conflict of interest. So, of course, that's a challenge we will all have to deal with. My opinion is, from a brand's perspective, we have heard every brand going out into the market in the last 4 weeks and giving out their commitments of how they will take care of their colleagues and guests. And, in whatever shape and form they're rolling it out, whatever branding they call it, whatever partnerships they call it, everybody has got something out in the market by now. It's probably easier for brands to push back and say, look, we have a program. We don't need any other third-party certification because I'm good to go and I have the confidence. I would guess the challenge would be for standalone hotels, and definitely something which probably as larger industry players, we should also look at and say, how can we support that by coming up with something which is easier, because this should not then influence business going from one to another. Exactly as Sanjay mentioned, the algorithms being affected, because then it goes into a very different tangent. And if I connect to what Mandeep said about the hospitality graduates being insecure, I must say that it's not just graduates who are insecure with the pandemic around. I think even the senior most industry executive is facing some sort of insecurity, which he's not seen in his 30, 40 years of career. So I think it's a pandemic related psychological feeling. Everybody will get through it. Probably they are in better space because they can learn from the experience at a very young age, which a lot of us are learning at this age, because in the last 20 years, we have not seen something like this. So it's easier to learn at that age. We are a lot more adaptable. Given that there is a lot of talk about technology coming in, what better than the new generation to take on that technology, be multi-scaled, come in and make a big impact on how they can add value to the industry. So exactly like you said, Mandeep, yes, this is a great industry. They should definitely be encouraged to come in. I think there will be space for everybody to coexist. No channel is going to go off overnight just because of a pandemic. As we are trying to work on various ways to come back, we will also be dependent on various channels. At the end of the day, hotels have a choice to pick up business from each segment and each channel. So that will continue. Yes, there will be some push and pull on things like certification. But having said that, no, I don't see a change in the immediate future.